Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. So find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, by listener request, let's return to more from a charming and instructive work, The Woman and the Car, a chatty little handbook for all women who motor or who want to motor, by Dorothy Levitt. Edited with introductory articles by C. Bing Hall. Illustrated by photographs specially taken. First published in 1909 by John Lane Company, London and New York. Let's pick up our instruction right where we left off. Chapter 4. How to Drive. Fire in the heart of me, moving and chattering. Youth in each part of me, slender and strong. Light and tremendous, I bear you along. These lines, I feel sure, appeal to every motorist, as they exactly describe the little car in motion. Starting one's engine is not the nicest thing about motoring when a woman is acting as her own driver and mechanician. But with the little cars, no strength is required. It is only the big cars that need a swelling of muscle. There is a great knack in starting an engine, but this, once overcome, ceases to be hard work. In front of the car you will notice a handle. Push it inwards until you feel it fit into a notch. Then pull it up sharply, releasing your hold of the handle the moment you feel you have pulled it over the resisting or compression point. Unless starting a car fitted with magneto-ignition, on no account press down the handle. Always pull it upwards smartly and sharply. If it is pressed down, the possibility of a backfire is greater, and a broken arm may result. This, however, is not a common occurrence, and is one that is brought about entirely through carelessness on the part of the would-be driver. If the car has not been used for some hours, it will sometimes be necessary to turn the starting handle 2 or 3 times. Speaking from my own experience, 3 times is the maximum. It will usually start on the second turn. Of course, in the winter, it will take 2 or 3 turns, as the petrol freezes and takes longer to vaporize. The moment the engine is running, you can get in the car and start driving. Hold the steering wheel with both hands in the manner and position in which it is most comfortable to yourself. Keep a firm hold of it all the time, and do not get into the habit of driving with one hand on the wheel. Use both, except when it is necessary to use either for changing speed, etc. Advance the ignition lever forward and give more air by pulling back the air lever. When you have tried the car once or twice, you will easily be able to gauge the distance these various levers should be moved. Remember, the faster the engine runs, the more air she will take, though when climbing a hill, it is necessary to drive on a richer mixture, less air with the regular supply of petrol, and cut off the air inlet almost entirely. You will soon understand the different sounds of the engine and their prevention or cure. When the car is stationary and the engine running, always endeavor to run it as quietly as possible. It is sometimes annoying to people to have the noise of an automobile outside their door, and no good can accrue by allowing the engine to run on unchecked. Underneath the steering wheel, on the steering column, you will notice the throttle lever mentioned in the preceding chapter. Its function is to regulate the mixture in the carburetor. When you wish the engine to run very quietly and slowly, you move this little lever from right to left. When starting to drive again, do not omit releasing the throttle. Otherwise, the engine may stop owing to insufficiency of gas. Your next move is to take off the side brake. You will find this lever on the right-hand side of the car. Now you are absolutely ready to start. Always remember that a car should receive careful treatment, so therefore do not attempt to move anything by jerking it roughly. Take everything very quietly. You will notice two pedals on the left and right respectively of the steering column on the floor. The left-hand pedal acts as a throttle, shutting off gas in exactly the same manner as the hand throttle explained above. That is, when it is pressed down halfway, and the throttling process acts according to the amount of pressure put upon the pedal. If it is pressed down still further, it acts as a brake. This foot throttle and foot brake are more frequently used than the hand throttle and hand brake. The small pedal on the right-hand side of the steering column is brought into service when first or lowest speed is required. Thus, to start the car, you press down the pedal as far as it will go, at the same time pressing lightly on the throttle or left-hand pedal, and take hold of the change speed or gear lever and push it as far forward as it will go, at the same time releasing the left-hand pedal and keeping down the one on the right. You are now traveling on first speed. You will soon tell when this speed has reached its maximum power, as the engine will be running very fast. It will then be time to change to second speed. This is done by releasing the right-hand pedal. Throttle slightly with the left foot and bring the gear lever towards you as far as it will go, at the same time slowly lifting your foot off the throttle. You will now find the car moving much faster and will be able to tell, as in the former instance, when the maximum speed is obtained. When you hear the engine beginning to race or run very fast, slightly throttle again and push the gear lever into third speed, away from you, the same position as for first. Though, of course, in this instance, it is unnecessary to touch the right-hand pedal, which you must remember is only used for lowest speed. You are now on third or top gear, and will find that unless the country is very hilly, you will usually be able to keep the car running on this gear for a long time, varying the speeds from 10 to 28 miles an hour by deftly manipulating the ignition, air, and throttle. Changing speed on the car illustrated is an easy task, and that is why I have taken the de Dion car as an object lesson. With the majority of cars, there is a deal of arm work necessary, and in many cases not a little strain, this strain very often counteracting the benefits otherwise derived from the driving. In changing speed, always remember to throttle slightly, whether in changing from first or second to top, or in slackening speed from top to second or first. Never change from first to top speed or from top to first without using the intermediate speed. The first speed on these little cars is from 0 to 9 miles an hour, the second from 9 to 18, and the top from 18 to 28. I should advise you to get thoroughly used to the steering while on second speed, and at first drive very slowly. Do not expect to be able to control the car in a few minutes. Take your time and get in sympathy with your motor, as you would the horses you drive or ride. Gain confidence slowly. Once you have confidence in yourself, the battle is nearly won. Bear in mind that when riding or driving a horse, it is only partly under your control. As it has a brain and will of its own, it can bolt if it wishes to. But with a motor car, you rely upon yourself alone. You are master, or should I say mistress, of the situation. When it is necessary to drive backwards, push forward the small lever you will find at the side by the handbrake. Push the change speed lever forward into the same position as for top speed, and steer exactly the reverse way to what you would do if you were going forward. This will no doubt prove awkward at first, and will necessitate a little practice, but when once mastered, you will find it equally easy to steer the car either in a backward or forward direction. When running on any speed, if you allow the car to gain impetus and then put the change speed lever in neutral position, the car will travel on in the same manner as a freewheel bicycle, the action of the gear being neutral, temporarily disconnecting the engine and gear. If you see an obstacle in the road, do not go up to it at full speed and suddenly put on the brake. The sudden application of the brake will hasten the end of the life of your tires, and if you are not driving on non-skid tires, a bad accident may be the result if the road is at all wet. Of course, occasion may sometimes arise whereby it is absolutely necessary to apply the brakes very suddenly. For instance, if a car makes its appearance from a side turning that perhaps you had not noticed, or an individual or dog attempts to cross the road a few yards in front of your car. But in cases of this kind, you must rely on your own judgment. You will soon understand how far the car will run with a given impetus and learn to use the brakes gently and sparingly. Never get into the habit of using only one brake. It is more convenient to use the foot brake, but if you do not sometimes use the hand brake, when an emergency arises, you will find yourself looking for the hand brake, instead of your hand instinctively going out to it in the fraction of a second. In traveling uphill, run as far as possible at top speed, meanwhile listening to the throb of the engine. When the top speed drops to about the maximum speed of the second, it is time to change back to second, but do not allow the engine to run too slowly before changing. Otherwise, it will not pick up, and it will be a great strain on it. If the hill is a very steep one, it may be necessary to change to first. There is always a correct moment for changing speed, both on the level and on hills, but this is a thing that can only come with practice. If you have a long decline to negotiate, turn the switch off so that the engine is not running, allowing the car to roll down on its own impetus, controlling with the brakes. But remember, on the car slowing down after passing the foot of the hill, to put the top gear in and switch on again. Otherwise, the engine may stop. If you are driving in a very hilly or mountainous country, you must give the engine a charge of oil more frequently than every 20 miles on account of its having to be on low gear, when the engine runs much faster and is liable to get overheated. And if it does become overheated, you will soon notice a nasty knock, regarding which I will explain in a later chapter on troubles. Chapter 5. Troubles. How to avoid and to mend them. Your troubles with a car may be nil, or they may be aplenty. You may be at fault, and again the trouble may simply be one of ordinary misfortune or due to the idiosyncrasies of your car. But to whatever it is due, learn quickly to mend matters and to laugh at them rather than weep. I well remember the first time I started out alone without a chauffeur. Somehow or other, the car stopped. Cars in those days were not so reliable as they are today, and the one I had lent me had done good service. For several hours, I could not make out what was the matter, wept bitter tears, and was so downhearted that it took me a day to get over it. But most of the little troubles that arise are easily overcome on a modern car, when once one understands how to locate them. Train your ear to distinguish the slightest sound foreign to the consistent running of the engine. A single misfire means that there is some little thing needing attention. But always remember to switch off the electric current before touching anything. If you do not, you will get a shock. There is only one trouble regarding which you are really justified in feeling angry. That is a punctured or burst tire. It is possible for a woman to repair a tire, but I am sure I am correct in saying that not one woman in 1,000 would want to ruin her hands in this way. Nowadays there is a repairer in nearly every village, and the best plan is to drive very slowly on the rim to the nearest repair shop. With a small, light, single-cylinder car, it will do no harm. But if you drive too fast or far, the inner tube may be damaged. However, it is advisable to carry a stepney wheel. These wheels are really indispensable and should have the place of honor on a woman's car. This stepney wheel is an ordinary wheel fitted with flanges to fix on to the existing wheel, and carries a tire already pumped up and can be affixed to your car in less than 10 minutes. No strength is required to put it in place. In regard to tires, there are several good makes, such as Dunlop, Continental, Michelin, and several others. The stock car you buy from the maker will probably be fitted with one of these makes, but will have plain or corrugated treads. As there is such a great danger through skidding, it is advisable to pay a little extra and have non-skid tires fitted. In addition to preventing the car turning round on a greasy road, being steel-studded, they will obviate puncture to a great extent. I used them winter and summer, for although the country roads in summer are dry and the danger of side slip very small, when you reach a town, you will nearly always find the tram lines, if there are any, have been watered, and it is really in towns where the non-skid tires are a necessity. There are a dozen little things that may occur to you at any time, and which you can easily remedy yourself. But before starting on a lonely ride, it would be well for you to practice the remedying of the troubles. In fact, give yourself lessons in them. As I have already stated, you may go almost a year without troubles of any kind. Still, you should know all there is to know about them. Sooted plug. This is caused by the engine getting too much oil. If the plug is sooted, it will appear to be very black and oily looking. It is a matter of a minute to loosen the sparking plug with a spanner and replace it with a new one. But if you are not carrying a spare plug and are not in a hurry for a few minutes, the dirt is easily washed off with a little petrol. Faulty plug. If the engine misfires, it may either be owing to the above-mentioned trouble or may be caused by the porcelain becoming cracked or loose in its seating. As this cannot be repaired, a new plug is necessary. Gap on sparking plug badly adjusted. If the engine is not pulling well, it may be owing to the fact that the two tiny points across which the spark leaps are either too wide apart or are set too closely together. If you get a good spark with the points in a certain position, it is a good plan to insert the blade of a small penknife before finally replacing the plug, making a mark on the knife where it was inserted. On a future occasion, this will be found useful, as if the knife is again inserted between the points of a new plug and the points either opened or closed to meet the marked portion of the blade, the correct adjustment will at once be arrived at. To test battery. It is necessary to do this periodically, as if the battery is not showing a sufficient number of amperes, the car will run badly. The test is made with an ammeter, provision for which has been made in the list of spares, the positive points making contact with those corresponding on the battery, the amperage being registered on a small dial. It should always show 4 or over. When it gets below this point, it is advisable to carry a spare battery, as a stop on the road through a battery giving out is annoying, and a battery cannot be procured at every repairer's. Empty petrol tank. If the car comes to a standstill after a few misfires, it may be caused through the petrol supply being exhausted on account of the tank having sprung a leak, or the petrol merely being used up. The former is a very unusual occurrence, rarely occurring on a car with the petrol tank under the seat. Where the tank is placed at the back of the frame of the car, it is often punctured by a sharp stone striking it. Always, if going any distance, carry a spare can of petrol and a funnel, and before filling the tank, be quite sure that there is no dust in the funnel or on the top of the can, as the smallest quantity of dirt will choke your petrol or carburetor, and this takes a long time to remedy. Choked petrol pipe or carburetor. You may possibly believe at first that this trouble is caused by the petrol running out. So look in the tank, and if it contains petrol, you may be sure that the flow is checked in some way. Agitate the float of the carburetor, and it will most likely be found that there is no petrol coming through. Therefore, there must be a stoppage between the tank and the carburetor. At the bottom of the carburetor, there is a little joint, connecting the carburetor with a small tube through which the petrol is carried. See first that the petrol supply is turned off. Then loosen the joint and take out the pipe. Then turn on the petrol and see if it comes through as far as that. If it does, the trouble must be in the carburetor jet. It is a simple task to remove this with the carburetor jet spanner, and an ordinary hairpin would then remove every obstacle. Water in carburetor. This may sometimes cause the engine to run badly, and is not an unusual occurrence. On the top of the carburetor being removed, the water will easily be noticed. It is heavier than petrol, and the little drops of water in the petrol look like drops of lead. In order to guard against suspected water, you can filter the petrol through a handkerchief laid in the funnel. Sticking valves. With the inlet valve, this trouble may be caused by oil and dirt. If this is the case, it can be taken out and washed in petrol and replaced. The car may not run as it should on account of the inlet and exhaust valves being pitted and needing grinding in. To grind in, use a little emery powder and oil and plenty of elbow grease until you succeed in eliminating all the little pits and making the surface quite smooth. Be careful to clean off all traces of the emery after grinding. Platinum point and screw adjustment. The platinum point on the trembler blade or screw occasionally gets worn uneven. When contact is made, if the adjustment is not correct, the point will get worn down on one side, and the engine will probably develop a knock, and you will not be getting the maximum horsepower out of it. It is a simple matter to smooth the points, but a delicate touch is necessary. The filing must be done with your finest file, and a very few touches are necessary. Should you not happen to have a very fine file with you, the points can be smoothed with emery paper, but care should be exercised in its use. Again, let me warn you to have the electric current switched off before making any of these repairs or adjustments, and particularly before removing the trembler blade, screw, or plug. When the trembler blade and screw are replaced, they will require readjustment. When you think they are set at the proper point, switch on and give the starting handle a few turns, as if to start the engine. At the same time, hold down the inlet valve by pressing down the small button on top of the cylinder. While turning, watch the spark between the 2 points. If it is feeble, the adjustment is not correct. The screw is either tight or too loose. After a few attempts, you will be able to adjust very quickly and almost unerringly. See that the points are kept free from oil. Loose terminals. The car may run badly on account of a loose terminal of the wires on the sparking plug or battery. This is simply a matter of thoroughly tightening up the various little nuts with a spanner. It is a good plan to just look over these occasionally, for when the terminals once begin to work loose, they will gradually get worse, and you will probably have a stop on the road. Irregular petrol supply. If the carburetor is getting too much or too little petrol, it should be remedied by readjusting the needle valve in the carburetor. When once it is properly set, it will sometimes go for years without readjustment. Punctured float. I mention this trouble as I have personally experienced it, but it is very rare and may not occur in the whole life of a car. The float is a hollow cube for the purpose of regulating the height of petrol in the carburetor. The float, if punctured, allows the petrol to enter, causing it to remain at the bottom of the carburetor, gradually taking in more petrol. The effect of this is that the float does not perform its office, as it becomes weighted with the petrol, and this holds open the petrol inlet, which overflows out of the carburetor. I believe I have now enumerated all the troubles that you are likely to meet with, and which you can look after yourself. But because the list is long, do not think for one moment that every time you go out in your little car, you are going to experience them. You may drive for weeks, months, almost years, without a tiny bit of trouble if you are careful. The looking after the little things saves a heap of trouble. The testing of this thing, the dusting of that, the tightening of a nut, the loosening of a screw, all these may be commonplace trivial matters, but if attended to, will pay in the long run. Prevention is better than cure, and the careful motorist who looks after her car as she looks after herself will have little use for the hints in this chapter of mine. Above all, whatever may arise, try to forget to weep and remember to laugh. Then you will have won half the battle of motor woe. Chapter 6. Hints on Expenses. By the time you have read and thoroughly digested the preceding chapters, I feel sure you will be able to take your car out for a spin without any misadventure. There are but a few points which I want to impress upon you in this chapter. Do not let what you may think the great expense debar you from the pleasure of motoring. There is no great expense unless you want to make it so. In my first chapter, I spoke of the price of cars and accessories. I gave a total of £300 as the average probable outlay. By no means do I want to revise these figures, but wish to remind you that the figures quoted are, in every instance, for articles of the very best quality. There are now being made several small cars by big firms, many of these cars being eminently suitable for a woman to drive. It is possible to procure a car at £120. The accessories also, such as the hood and screen, need not be plated or expensively enameled. Cape Cart hoods, which have the ironwork painted instead of plated, are quite as serviceable, require less cleaning, and the cost is considerably less, and so with other things. But it is wise to always get the best. Durability and reliability is what you want, especially if you are limited as to expenditure. I particularly mention these matters because only the other day a friend spoke to me about the expenditure and said that she could not possibly afford £300. She proposed to buy a second-hand car for a small sum and have it repaired. My advice to her was don't, and then I ran over a list of expenditure in getting a new car and everything necessary new. Taking the same quality as mentioned in my first chapter, but not as expensively or so well finished, I found my total less than £230. One could, of course, go much below this by buying a second-hand car, but I would not advise this. If you know the people who have a second-hand car for sale, and can thus be assured that you will not in any way be tricked, then it might be worth buying. But from the experience of people I know, I would rather warn you against the cars which are advertised as good as new and for sale for a few pounds. You would probably have to spend in repairs in the first year as much as a new car would cost. So soon as you are the owner of a car, licensed and ready for the road, become a member of the Ladies' Automobile Club of Great Britain and Ireland. Its headquarters are situated at Claridge's Hotel in Upper Brook Street. The club has a suite of rooms there. Send in your application to Miss K. de Stair Hughes, the secretary of the club. By joining the club, you have many advantages. For instance, there is, of course, the convenience of using the club rooms and the club garage when in town, and in getting a percentage off your hotel bills. But there is the greater advantage of getting all the necessary information you may want regarding hotels, roads, and such like when you want to go for a tour. There is, in fact, scarcely any information appertaining to motoring which you cannot get at the club. It is always good for a woman car owner to belong to the first motor club in the kingdom. Every big town has an automobile club affiliated with the Royal Club, with which the Ladies' Club is also affiliated, so that by membership in the Ladies' Club you have a standing at once with the other clubs throughout the country and also abroad. Every motorist should become a member of the Automobile Association. It is an association formed for the purpose of placing scouts on the different main roads to warn motorists of police traps, and the expenditure of £2 2 a year in this direction will perhaps be the means of saving you 4 or 5 times that amount within a few months. You will be given an AA badge to fasten on the front of your car, and on seeing this, the scouts will always stop you if there is any danger. With regard to learning to drive, you must do so on quiet country roads or at one of the many motoring schools in and around the big cities. But know something of the school before you decide on it. There are many in which your money would be thrown away. If you do not go to a school, choose a road where there is little or no traffic. One is not allowed to learn in the parks. In fact, there is quite a heavy fine imposed on inexperienced drivers who use the parks. Do not go into a street of heavy traffic until you have thoroughly mastered your car, and then drive first some half-dozen times with an expert friend as chauffeur, and thus get used to the crushes and the twistings and turnings. In traffic, use your own judgment. Ladies are usually bad at judging distances, and it is well to keep as much toward the middle of the road as possible, and not try too many near things until you have reached the expert class. Do not be afraid to sound your horn, yet do not use it more than necessary. At cross streets or roads, and when approaching corners, sound the horn and slacken speed by throttling. There are numberless little things which, after you have graduated to the ranks of the experienced motorist, you will buy, not because they are absolutely necessary, but because of their convenience. For instance, a speedometer. All the half-dozen makes are good ones. A speedometer is a very interesting accessory, for it tells you exactly the pace at which you are traveling, and in some instances has been known to influence the decision of a magistrate when deciding a charge of exceeding the speed limit. For winter driving, they are now making a fur and leather arrangement which covers the steering wheel, but I would suggest that, to the beginner at any rate, this is superfluous. Soft kid gloves, fur-lined, are much better. Novelties of all sorts are always coming on the market, but the beginner had better let someone else try these first. It is an expensive thing to keep on experimenting with every new device for a car or the motorist. Let others try them, and if they should prove of real use, you will soon know. Chapter 7. Motor Manners. It is, of course, quite unnecessary to teach the well-bred woman manners. The well-bred woman, with her innate courtesy and unselfishness, should she take up motoring, no doubt would act as all motorists should act when at the wheel of their car or out on the road. So that while I have headed this chapter Motor Manners, I desire merely to bring to the notice of readers as prominently as possible those things which they should do and those which they should not do when out in their cars. I can safely give this advice, for personal experience has been my teacher. For want of a better term, I call these warnings and suggestions manners. If every woman and man who drove a car followed these suggestions, there would not be an outcry against the motor car. Unfortunately, the great majority of motorists have to suffer for other people's faults, the disgraceful driving of the few. The laws now governing motoring have increased largely in the last few years, and will probably continue in the making. I will not go into these various laws, except to point out that because a person owns a motor car, the ownership of the road is not necessarily included. Pedestrians, according to the law, practically own the highways, not to the exclusion of other traffic, but judgments in recent cases declare that it lies with drivers to keep clear of pedestrians, and that all persons have a right to walk on the highways at their own pace, whether paralytics or cripples. Dogs, chickens, and other domestic animals at large on the highway are not pedestrians, and if one is driving at a regulation speed or under, one is not responsible for their untimely end. It is therefore especially advisable to drive slowly through all towns and villages. Drive slowly past all schoolhouses. Always pass vehicles and bicycles on the proper side, and pass large vans, buses, and electric tram cars very carefully, as someone may be crossing the road and suddenly appear from behind. Drive slowly past anyone driving or riding a restive horse, and if necessary, especially if it should be a lady or child riding or driving, stop the engine. This is an act of courtesy that will always be appreciated and may prevent a bad accident. If the road is wet, give pedestrians and cyclists a wide berth so as not to splash them with mud. Again, if the road is wet, you may be safe enough on account of your car being fitted with non-skid tires, but in this respect the cyclist is perhaps not so fortunate. He may have a side slip and fall perilously near your car wheels. For this reason, too, give cyclists plenty of room. Do not fail to sound the hooter and slacken speed when coming to a crossroad, side turning, or bend. Many accidents may be averted by taking this precaution. Never take a sharp corner at full speed. a walking pace would be much better. Never pass or try to overtake a pedestrian, cyclist, or vehicle at a corner. Avoid the bad and perilous habit of trying to squeeze through doubtful openings in traffic, either in town or country. Never drive the engine downhill. Do not leave the engine running when stopping outside a house. The noise, though it may be slight, may be annoying to the inmates or neighbors. If you have a siren fitted to your car, do not sound it in a town or village. A siren is really only necessary for continental driving. Remember that mail vans have the right of way, and that ordinary traffic is supposed to give way to them. A hooter is meant to give warning, not to startle people or wake up sleeping inmates in their houses at all hours. Do not sound your horn oftener than absolutely necessary. Remember, however, that it is necessary to sound the hooter when coming up behind and intending to pass a pedestrian or vehicle. But do not wait until you are within a few feet of a pedestrian or cyclist who is already doing his utmost to get out of your way, and then sound your hooter. If the cyclist be a novice or at all nervous, such conduct might cause an accident. Keep within the legal limit of speed all the time, except on good and clear stretch of road, where there happen to be no blind corners or dangerous crossroads or traffic. Then there is no real harm done to anyone in trying to see what you can get out of your car for a short spurt. I cannot give you any special advice on the dust nuisance, but if you follow my suggestions as already given, you will cause the public as little inconvenience from dust as is in your power. There is a little thing I specially want to warn motorists against, and that is taking corners on the wrong side of the road. Ordinarily, you would not think of doing so, but wait until you come to a few corners which you can see well around. There is nothing in sight, and so you skim the curb for the fun of it. But do not keep on cutting corners. Sooner or later it will become a habit and be done without thinking. Then comes the possibility of another car, a vehicle of sorts, a motorcycle, or worst of all, a cycle with a woman or child pedaling. You may not lose your presence of mind, but how about the cyclist? Don't cut corners on the wrong side of the road, and there will be no need to worry about the answer to my query. That one can show a great deal of courtesy to other cars and to general traffic on the road is assured, but that few people do is also a fact. Here is a case worthy of attention. Every motorist has or will experience it. On the road in front of you is a covered car with noisy engine. It is a landaulet or limousine which rattles more or less. The noise of the engine is also magnified by being closed in. The car is taking up the best part of the road, and though you are anxious to pass it, you cannot, because of the noise, attract the attention of the chauffeur and get him to draw out enough for you to make a safe pass. It is very annoying and may go on for some time. See to it, therefore, if you have a closed-in car, that there is a mirror attached to the dashboard so that the chauffeur can see what is behind him and instruct him also to keep a watch from time to time for coming up cars so that you can extend to them the courtesy of the road. One other matter may be included in motor manners, and that is leaving the car on the road or in the street unattended. In the first place, the law says that you cannot leave your car unattended, whether the engine is running or not. It is within the discretion of the police to summons you. They, however, do not interfere unless the engine is running noisily and the exhaust is smoking. But in leaving one's car unattended on the road or street, care should be taken, as an act of courtesy to general traffic and pedestrians, that the car does not block the way. If on the curb in town and it be possible, leave it on a side street. Or if in front of a house or shop, give other people a chance to drive up to the front door. At the same time, do not stand your car deliberately in front of someone else's house, instead of your own or your friends, if you are visiting. And with that fine advice, we've reached the end of Chapter 7 and this evening's reading from The Woman and the Car by famed automobilist and racer Dorothy Levitt, a woman who led a very fascinating life. If you'd like to read this work for yourself and see the photographs, as always, I'll leave a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. The description also includes links to ways you can support this podcast, either by becoming a member of Patreon, where you'll receive exclusive perks like monthly episodes heard nowhere else, or by dropping us a one-time tip via buymeacoffee.com, no subscription required. By supporting us, you help us cover the costs of recording, production, and distribution, while keeping this podcast ad-free for everyone. So I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. And thank you to everyone who supported us so far. It's really much appreciated. I'm so glad you could join me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.